Welcome back to Tranquility du Jour, nourishing conversations about living a full and meaningful life with doses of tranquility. Episode 512. I'm your host, Kimberly Wilson, bringing you tranquility since 2005. Today, we're talking with Lauren Cerand about taking a creative leap, a pretty big one, living la dolce vita, and ultimately coming home to yourself. Pull up a chair, grab a cup of tea, because I think you're going to really enjoy this episode. Now, for those of you not familiar with Tranquility du Jour, a reminder, you can subscribe in your favorite podcast app. There's links to this in the show notes, which can be found at kimberlywilson.com/512. There's also a link to locate the Tranquility du Jour app so you can have all the episodes with you while on the go. For those of you planning ahead and ready to plan 2021, let's be honest, New Year's virtual retreat is happening January 1st from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern Time, and I would love to have you join us. So some of you may know I typically will lead a 3-hour one on New Year's Eve at the yoga studio and then an in-person one in my office on New Year's Day. Well, unfortunately, we will not be in person this year, so I'm opening up a virtual one, to everyone on New Year's Day. Would love to have you. It's a wonderful way to set intentions, get creative, do some reflection, and also do some dreaming and designing. So one thing I'm pretty sure about, Tranquility du Jour listeners, is that you love books. You are also bibliophiles. With all the authors that have been interviewed over the years and all the books we have shared, I think that this exciting offer is going to really appeal to you because I know the tricky thing is finding the time to read, right? And that's why Audible can be an excellent resource, listening to audiobooks. And you can listen from any device, anywhere, iPhones, tablets, computers, and then you just pick right up where you left off. They literally have hundreds of thousands of titles, including our Book of the Month for the online book club, Tranquility du Jour. So sign up for a 30-day free trial, and your first book is free. You can find out more and do this over at audibletrial.com/tranquility du jour. That's audibletrial.com/tranquility du jour. Happy reading. Now, I'm so excited to share this podcast episode with you. So let me tell you a little bit about Lauren. She's a jeweler, writer, and consultant with 20 years of experience running her own thriving global communications consultancy. Based in New York and driven by an intense personal focus on each client's needs and desires, a vast network of relationships, and unparalleled expertise and creative ingenuity. In 2019, she took a sabbatical to immerse herself in the study of jewelry design and creation full-time in Florence, Italy, and learn more about the Italian language and way of life. While there, she also published an essay in Dining in Place, the online food and culture magazine based in Melbourne, and had another essay shortlisted in the Mollie Salisbury Cup memoir writing competition, administered by the Garden Museum in London. She has returned to New York in fall 2020 and looks forward to enjoying the city in the best season, at the height of her creative powers. Welcome, Lauren.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
It's a treat to have you here. And, as we started before the recording, it's like, when's the last time we connected? And I mean, was all of that 10, 12 years ago? That's unacceptable.
Well, I mean, I feel like I see you all the time online. So
Right.
I think in the future will be a word for a very warm friendship that exists entirely in a virtual space that is quite real in some dimension. But yeah, no, I think that we can say that our friendship is firmly grounded in the early aughts, which have their own kind of sex appeal now as a defined decade that we have left behind. So yeah, I have very sentimental feelings towards it, but we will have to rectify getting together in person.
Absolutely. Well, and it's so funny because I remember the first time I ran into you again, we were in a hotel room at Bella. Was Bella her name? What was the woman's name who was running
Oh,
this like
yes.
course on like marketing your book or something?
Bella Stander, Book
Bella.
Promotion 101.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Yes. Thank you. And then like you were there as, an expert
Yeah,
and then you're like, hey, I actually know you. And you're like, oh my gosh, we do know each other. So weird. And that was probably 2006. I think it was before Hip Tranquil Chick came out.
it was. Yeah, definitely. Because you were there as an author, but I was like, oh no, I remember you from DC. And yeah, it was like a totally different thing.
Yeah. Random like New York hotel room. Like, what are the chances,
New York, the chances are pretty good, but it was very special.
So tell me, give us a little before we dive into like kind of my big question for you, but a little bit on your background because you actually grew up in DC, right?
Yeah, I was born in Washington, D.C., at Sibley Hospital, and I grew up in Potomac, Maryland. I lived there until I was 17. When I was 17, I moved to New York with a friend for a few months after I graduated early from high school. And then I went to school in New Orleans for a year, Loyola University. And then I transferred to Cornell. And after I went to Cornell, I majored in industrial and labor relations. And at that time, I'd had a few years kind of being out in the world. And I realized, that I'd just been given kind of incredible opportunity after opportunity. And that I wanted to do something, like the author of The Little Prince says, when you give of yourself, you receive more than you give. And I felt like I wanted to start my career being a part of something bigger than me. So I went to go work at the AFL-CIO in Washington, D.C., but I didn't have a specific job in mind. And I was applying for a media outreach kind of fellowship. And they said, can you talk on the phone and write letters? Because this is 2001. And I was like, yeah, of course. I was formerly a teenage girl. And so that is where I kind of learned how to do everything that I do. I did that for a couple of years, working on sort of big social justice campaigns. Got recruited to come to New York to work for the Garment Workers Union, which was and is a super legendary place. And then I went to go work for the 92nd Street Y, doing the lectures and dance PR when I was 23, maybe. And at that time, I had a bunch of things that I was doing on the side that were really inspiring to me. And they were all kind of getting magnetized to the internet as this like really amazing new dimension to sort of everything in society. And so my intention just started to drift there, and like everything, when you follow your small passions, they tend to become your large ones. And I went out on my own. So I worked on my own since I was 24 years old, maybe. And kind of everything else flows from that.
Yeah. And then how did you get into the kind of like working with authors piece?
So I had a boyfriend who I met when I worked at the AFL-CIO. He had been there the year before me, because basically every year they would recruit a few dozen really bright, ambitious young college graduates who would work there for a year. And the idea was that we would all become, galvanized by this idea of working in the social justice movement, and that we would go on to do things that were informed by that. And anyway, he had organized the interns to have their own workplace rights, which was really hot and brave. And I had a crush on him for quite a while before our paths crossed. And when I moved to New York, he followed me not long after. And he had a website at the time that was doing political criticism and media criticism and kind of fact-checking things that politicians would say that were bending the truth, which, we could really use right now. And he had a book coming out, and the publisher made it really clear that, he and his co-authors were young and they hadn't paid a lot of money for it, and they didn't think it was really that big of a deal. And I just remember hearing it as someone who, was always looking for a wrong to right. And I just thought, man, nothing's going to happen. I can't let that happen on my watch in this house. So I did his PR. I cold called The Daily Show. I got him on The Daily Show. It became an overnight New York Times bestseller. And he took me to Paris. So the compensation was totally fair. And I thought after that, I really like working with writers, and working with books is so much like political campaigns because they're very intense for a sort of short burst of time. So you're always bringing new energy in and learning new things and making new relationships. And I understood completely how it would work. And so I thought I'll do more of that. And then I started to get phone calls from writers, and I started to work with them. And the rest is, as they say, history.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Yeah, I mean, because you are very talented with that. And, of course, I followed you over the years, social media, and it was maybe a year ago where I saw a post and you're like, I'm moving to Italy to study jewelry design. And I was like, okay, I have got to reach out to Lauren and get a podcast about this. So tell me, like, okay, why? Okay, I mean, let's be honest, Italy is amazing, but I mean, why Italy and why jewelry design and why then?
Well, it started slow and then everything intersected. So the first thing that happened to me several years ago is I was interested in working with a really smart publisher who I knew had some really amazing books, and he just did not have a lot of American money. And so I really wanted to work with him. And as I was working out the proposal, I thought, well, you can't quite afford to work with me. But I was like, doesn't your family have some like villa in Italy? I was like, why don't you just give me some time there? I'll go on vacation there, and like, we'll consider that a kind of trade in kind, and it can be the rest of the payment for the work. But I guess in my mind, I didn't really think about actually going there. I was just trying to sort of do something that would work for both of us. And so a couple of years went by, and finally he was like, you really have to come this summer. Like, I can't convince my sisters to save a week for you every year. And so I went, and immediately I just felt like a completely transformed person. I had been to Italy when I was 30 to work at the Rome Film Festival with a director who had a movie in the competition. So it was a bit different, and I liked it, but I was really used to going to Paris a lot and London, and I was kind of used to speaking the language where I went. I didn't understand Italian, and I was just a little overwhelmed. Like, I remember being 30 and like being dazzled by it, but just not really thinking like, I can't wait to come back. Whereas this time that I spent in this little small town in Lazio, I just felt, and there were no tourists there. There had never been any tourists there. And so you couldn't even go to the grocery store without speaking Italian. And so I remember thinking like, I want to come back here every year for the rest of my life. So I better learn Italian. So I came back and I immediately signed up for Italian class. And that was the first time probably in my entire career that I had ever set aside evenings for myself. Like, when you are a publicist, especially a freelance publicist, and especially when you work in the arts in New York City, night is prime time. That is like everybody else's morning at their desk. So I went out, I think at one point I had counted every single night for 7 years. And so that was the first kind of inkling of change. Suddenly I wasn't available. I was going to Italian class, I think 3 or 4 hours a week. So I just couldn't go out those nights. And I started to have a different sense of how my life might be balanced. But, I was freelancing, so it's still making money had to be the priority at all times. And then around that time, or not long after, I read The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron, which is a super transformative book for so many people. And I tried to read it a couple times in the past and made it to week 4. But this time I just kept going, actually. And I started really journaling and really doing the artist dates really seriously, because it was a kind of time that belonged to me alone. And I remember the first maybe 3 or 4 weeks, I did what I've always done, which is I went to museums and I looked at really beautiful paintings, which in New York, obviously, there's no limit to that. And I have my favorite paintings at the Met. I mean, Joseph Cornell's Setting for a Fairy Tale at the Whitney, I used to go look at when I was completely broke. And I was 22, and I would just imagine, the world I wanted to live in being in that little tiny shadow box. And I've gone back to see it many times over the years, or Caravaggio's, or there's just endless things to look at. But for some reason at that time, I just thought, I don't want to just look at something this week. I want to do something. And I was in my apartment and I thought, well, I'll just think about it and it will come to me. And a couple hours later, I was like, I want to take a jewelry class. I'd never taken a jewelry class in my life. I wear a lot of jewelry and I certainly buy a lot of jewelry, but I had never thought about making it. And so I signed up for a really simple class that weekend. I went, the teacher was great. She was really encouraging, and, she told me to keep going, and I felt really good about it. I went to another class. The teacher took me aside and she said, I don't know if you've thought about your future with the torch, but you're really good. And I thought, no, I've never thought about my future with the torch, but thank you. So I just kept doing it. And every time I went to a class, I just got this really, really positive affirmation. And I started to feel amazing. And so eventually I learned that the best jewelry school in the world was in Florence. And at the time I was going to night school at Pratt Institute. So I was working all day, and then I was, doing Italian 2 nights a week, and I was going to night school the other 3 nights a week. And so part of me had started to kind of detach from being this kind of robot freelance person, just trying to get by on my own all those years, honestly. And so I could visualize a life somewhere else because I wasn't so plugged into the one that had kind of exhausted me. And by the time I applied to the school, actually a client asked me to go to Florence and meet him last January. And I thought, I'll go and look at the school. And I did that while I was there. And I mean, the second that I was there, my mother told me that when I was looking for preschools when I was a child in Maryland, she drove me around, and every single preschool, I was like, I could not possibly go to this preschool. I was like 4 years old. And then we finally went to one, and like whatever it was, I was like, oh yeah, I really like the way that they stack the shoes here. It was something. And it ended up, of course, being like the super famous preschool 10 years later. But I did go to a great preschool, and I'm happy that I chose it myself. And I felt that way about the school. I walked in and everyone was at their bench, and it was really beautiful because it was Italian, and there's like a kind of greenhouse in the middle of the garden that's a classroom, and there's flowers all around it. And it just had this really happy buzz. And I thought my life could be like this, that's within reach. And so I think I applied on the plane, actually. I think I filled out, and no one knew. It was a total secret. And I think by the time I got home, or a day or two later, the time I woke up from my jet lag sleep, I had been accepted. And after that, things started to fall into place. Well, at first I thought I would work there. I found it very late in the game, and anyone who wants to talk about living in Europe is welcome to email me through my website. But I should have gotten an immigration lawyer. I didn't really want to spend the money because I didn't have a lot of money. So I didn't know that I couldn't keep my own business and go to school. I found out really, really late. And so I had to actually give everything up, really and truly, to do it. And I'm glad, though, in retrospect. I will say you should speak to a lawyer, but I'm glad I didn't, because I wouldn't have done it. It would have been a cost that I didn't think I could afford. But being there and just focusing on jewelry for a year and living super modestly off my savings and seeing things from an artist's point of view, is a gift I gave myself that was just absolutely irreplaceable and totally priceless. And so at the end of the year, I wasn't planning to come back to New York. 36 hours before I left Rome 6 weeks ago, my brother called me, and I was like, oh, why are you up at 3 a.m? And he was like, I just found out the family friend's house you're going to stay in indefinitely isn't available anymore. So I didn't have anywhere to live. And I looked at the apartments in the town upstate where I was going to go and kind of sit this whole pandemic out, frankly. And I just thought, I'm not supposed to live there. This is a sign. So I just thought to myself, the plane is going back to New York, so I'll just get off the plane. And that's what I did. And I kind of relaunched my life. But the jewelry thing continues, and the Italian thing continues. I like to think that I can have a life here and a life there. So that's what I'm working towards.
I love it. So yeah. So what do you think you'll do kind of with everything you learned that year? Like, do you plan to launch a collection? What are you thinking?
Well, it was really interesting because I think one of the really nice things about leaving America, which I had never done for a year, is that you start to really understand how even things that you consider objective are not objective. They're just a cultural lens and experience. So when I was in New York learning jewelry, there's a New York style, and basically you order a lot of things that have been kind of prepared for you, very close to the sense of being completed. And you work really fast because, it's expensive to rent time at a bench here. And you set really big stones because they sell for a lot of money and they're easy to get in the jewelry district. And it's the style. That's what people like here. So I was really in that kind of cocktail ring culture, which is very cool. And I admired a lot. And when I went to Florence, by contrast, I was going to school with art jewelers and also Italian jewelers. And so there, if you want to make something, you go to the Ponte Vecchio, where the goldsmiths have been for 500 years since the Medicis put them there because they didn't want to walk by butchers on their way to work. And you buy raw materials, the metal, and you calculate the alloy. So if silver is 925, that means it's 92.5% pure. And then you forge it. So I spent a lot of my time pouring, liquid red hot metal, and that's where a project begins. And so it gave me a really different sense of where things start and where the intentions really have to be set, at least for me in my work. And so, and it also made me able to really, really focus on things, because when you're pouring that metal, you really can't look at anything else. You can't do anything else. Your phone can't be anywhere near you. So that for me was super formative. So I have this kind of attitude now that anything I'm doing, I really want to focus on it. So I'm working a lot doing consulting again for writers and artists this month and next month, because the fall is really prime time in the cultural season here. And then in December and January, when I traditionally don't have a lot of work, I am going to go work in a studio again, and I am going to launch a line, and I'm going to sell some of the pieces that I made at school that are super beautiful. And actually today someone wanted to commission a work for me, and I don't have a website yet. And so I said, well, I've got to get a website. So that'll be my next project. But yeah, it's all a continuum. And I mean, ultimately, I'd love to be doing jewelry full time. I'd love to be back in Italy. There's some stuff that I want to learn in New York that is actually great to learn in New York in terms of setting stones themselves. It's a great place to do it. And I'm finishing my certificate at Pratt that I started a couple of years ago with my last class, which is on color theory. So I feel like I'm cooking on a few burners, but definitely in the right direction.
And what's the certificate in at Pratt?
It's in jewelry design and marketing. And it's really, really great. It's fantastic teachers. Actually, the first teacher that I ever studied with in the little weekend workshop that I went to was one of my teachers there. And yes, I know it's a small world, but I still think that's very cosmic. And you learn production design. So there's so many dimensions in jewelry. There's the kind of jewelry that someone makes where they put together pieces. There's the kind of jewelry where someone draws it and then has someone else make it. There's the kind of jewelry where, there's some combination of it, or where you're just doing designs and sending them to a factory. So at Pratt, I really learned about the entire spectrum of production and how to articulate my aesthetic and how to make a collection for a season. So you really get steeped in the kind of New York business vision, which is like super, super helpful. And then you also go to studio classes and you learn the basics. So that's where I learned, like, in a serious and concrete way, like how to work with the flame, with confidence, on my own, because you have such good teachers. That you can really, you can build those skills in a great, supportive, safe environment.
Very cool. Well, so tell us too a little bit about La Dolce Vita. So, like, what is that, right? And what was your experience of the sweet life in Italy?
Well, one thing that was really great for me is actually getting there and just realizing, like, everything that I had used to form my identity as an adult was not meaningful there, especially in Florence. So, like, in New York, in America, being a publicist is like quite a stylish job, and everyone knows what it is. They've seen Sex and the City or any rom-com, and they can visualize kind of what it means. In Europe, it's just not that way. Like, being famous is not important to people, for one thing. So, like, talking about marketing at a party is just gross. People talk about food and like what they're doing and the sunset. So it was like a real education in terms of kind of seeing the world differently. And I didn't have any money, so I didn't really do things that cost money. I mean, I would go for long walks, and food is not expensive there because there's a kind of sense, as in France, that sort of everyone has the right to have quality, healthy food. It's not out of reach for most people, and it's all grown like right where you are. So the seasonality of things is a huge thing there. Like porcini mushrooms will be so beautiful, you can't believe they're real, and they're just there for a week. So you have to really seize the moment there, and you have to live in a rhythm with the seasons. And also, people think and talk about climate change all the time, and I think because they're much more connected to the natural cycle of things, but also the Italian word for the environment is basically translates to the ambiance, which is kind of everywhere. Whereas I think when we talk about the environment, we have this sort of distant sense that it's quite far away, and maybe involves polar bears. So it was a really, really different sense that every single thing that I did had an effect or an impact on kind of every single other thing. And people are much more connected. Like, I had a relationship with everybody in my life, from the person at the grocery store to the people in my school to my landlords. Like, there was such an emphasis on getting to know people and spending actual real time talking face to face. I did go on social media when I was there just to kind of check in and keep up with friends, but the sort of balance of virtual relationships in my life and kind of real relationships in my life was completely inverted because, the most beautiful thing that you could do in Florence is go to a garden.
Yeah, it's well, I'm curious how this is translated. And of course, that's where like slow food, the whole slow movement began, right? But how has this translated for you since you've been back? Really, I mean, less than 2 months now.
Yeah, I feel really different. I mean, one of the reasons I wanted to leave New York was that I felt that, like, not having married money or inherited it or made particularly huge amount of it ever, it was always really a challenge for me to get by here. And I'm a generous person by nature. And so I was just always paying my rent, and that's about it. And but just to do that had made me quite hard. I'd become a really hard person, and I was very, very, very rigid in my relationships. And I felt that I had very little time. And, when I read my journals before I left, actually, I think I was really suffering, and I was masking it really well because I knew how to do that. But this year away, I mean, and also like in Italy, like there were things about my life that were incredibly hard and disappointing. Like I didn't get to live there forever. It was a really tough one for me to come to terms with. And I didn't have enough money to stay and complete the program. So I only did 1 year of a 2-year program. But I think that when I came back, the first thing that I really understood about myself that was very different was that I had become incredibly tender, that I had gotten in touch with the person that I think that I always was. And then I just have much better boundaries about it now. So I relate to people in a different way. Like I talk to everyone on the phone now. I don't just text or email. Like I wake up in the morning and I talk to my friend Marta in Rome for like an hour just about our days. I'm really interested in, these kind of funny questions like, oh, what are you having for dinner? Like what's going on in your life? What makes you happy? Like when was the last time you really laughed? Like I care about all those things because people asked me those questions when I lived in Italy. No one ever asked me about my job, and I didn't have one. And so, and talking about my jewelry and talking about my art, it's like the generosity of other people made me more generous with myself. That's a big one. And I eat really differently. So before I left, like I was always being really punishing with myself about my weight for my entire life. And, I wouldn't eat breakfast, or I would eat like a huge breakfast. I wouldn't eat lunch. Then I would eat like a huge dinner because I'd be out at work and I'd have like, 3 or 4 martinis or whatever. And that was kind of the pattern of my life. And my energy was sort of all over the place, but I didn't have an explanation for it. But in Italy, breakfast is really simple. It's like a cappuccino and maybe a pastry, and then you go about your day. Lunch is super important. Like it's got to be good. You usually cook it yourself, and you linger over it, and you don't have it alone. You like find someone to have lunch with, which was also a big difference for me. I spent so many years of my life in New York, just when I wasn't at a party, just profoundly, profoundly alone. And then dinner's like not that big of a deal. And so since I've been back, like my life revolves around food and eating in the same way that it did there. And I think I've, like lost 15 pounds without even thinking about it. And that is why that happens to people who spend any time in Europe. Because I feel like I understand my body and myself and my soul as kind of being a continuous cycle and not just, a thing to keep dipping into when you need endless reserves to kind of monetize.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I love it. It really is like a slowing down, connecting to the seasons, the pace, it's so different.
Also, when I left, I intended to never come to America again. So I gave away most of my possessions, and I couldn't remember what was in my storage unit when I was first living here. I did remember like taking my silverware drawer that was full of like old vintage silver and like dumping it out to like either my housekeeper, my neighbor, a friend. I don't remember, but I was like, I know that I don't even have forks. And then when I did unpack, I had like some art because people have paid me in art over the years. And so I have a really beautiful art collection, a few pieces of furniture from my family, and one evening gown, and a really beautiful set of cordial glasses that for some reason I thought I could not live without in some unspecified future. So it was quite a bit of work to furnish an apartment. But the takeaway that I really understood immediately, it was very much kind of my Italian experience, was that all of the kind of things that I bought over the years where I just bought the cheapest thing, I didn't keep. I really had gone through and selected just the most beautiful, meaningful things that I really cared about. And that was really how I lived in Italy. Like, I never bought new clothes the entire time I was there. I would go shopping in this vintage market on Sundays in Piazza Santo Spirito by my apartment, where everything is like $10 because there's like piles of Gucci everywhere. And that's just what you wear. Like, you just need a sweater because there's not much heat. And things are beautiful because there's not really an alternative. Italians are always looking for beauty and not much else. So I tried to bring a little bit into that my world as I was furnishing my place. I was like, go as slowly as you need to, but really think about what you want in your life. It matters.
It does matter. And so do you think you're going to be settling in, hunkering down in New York for a bit?
I did. I feel that I've been challenged continuously while I've been here. I had an amazing landlord when I first arrived, and he kind of challenged me about how long I would stay, because I originally only had enough money for 3 weeks. And I started working again, and I was like, well, I guess I could see myself like thriving until the end of May, but that's sort of as far out as I can imagine it right now. And then when I signed a lease, I just signed it till the end of May, because I said, I'm going back to Italy in the summer, and I don't really know what I want to do with my life after that. But now people are talking to me about some really nice projects for the end of next year, and my landlord wants me to stay. So we'll see what happens. But I think, the way that I have really gone through some super challenging times personally in the last year, and also experienced some unbelievable pleasure, is just by being really open to whatever happens. And that, like, the right thing for you might not be what you imagined it would be. Mm-hmm. And it may not be the first thing that happens. So I feel like I didn't visualize my life right now. I had no expectations for it. So I really can't be disappointed. Every day I wake up and I just think to myself, what am I going to eat for lunch?
I mean, how different, right?
Yeah.
From like how you were before you left for Italy.
Yeah. I mean, before I left for Italy, it was just sort of like, where do I have to go tonight? Asking my assistant, and nobody wants to be jaded about parties. Life is too short.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, I'm curious, Lauren, what would you say for people who are listening that are like, I want to go to Italy and make jewelry, or, I want to make some big move. I mean, I think especially now with COVID, so many people are questioning, like, why was I doing that? Why were we living this way?
Yeah.
And so what advice would you have? Because I think what you just said is really beautiful, the importance of just staying open.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all know in our heart what we want and need. I think sometimes we're just afraid to say it. Like for me, I wanted a totally different life. Now I have a totally different life in New York, but I didn't have the courage to take the things out of my life that I needed to before. And I didn't know how much I had to change. And I don't think I could have done that work here, actually, because I was still too inside the bubble. So I think the first thing is really to be honest with yourself, and one of the things that did that for me in terms of the artist way was the morning pages that I've recommended to many people since then, because if you write in your journal regularly, you really can't lie to yourself. The same things come up over and over and over again. And even if you're not willing to accept the responsibility that you have, you do sort of see the need for change, and when I was in Rome in my hotel room and I realized that I wasn't going to have a place to stay the day after the next day, and I was traveling with a cat in a pandemic, I just thought to myself, even if people disappoint you, this is your life. Like, you have to take full responsibility for it. It doesn't matter like what happens, like it's your life. So do what you want, and it might be hard, but just understand and appreciate like the incredible, beautiful opportunity and gift that is inside of that realization that you're not a victim and you're not owed anything. You are just a traveler in this world. And so I think just sort of giving yourself the permission to imagine things being different is incredibly powerful. I think for so many years in my life, I would go to London, I would go to Paris. I mean, I used to go to like Paris for the weekend and then pay off the credit card bill for the rest of the year, because I would be like, if I could just be happy for 24 hours, I mean, it's just so sad actually. But when I think about it now, I think like that's really amazing that I was still kind of grasping for beauty, and I was still grasping for joy, even in a time in my life when I could barely imagine those things for myself outside of just kind of producing things for other people. And so I think that having the courage to think this could be something else is really, really, really transformative. And once you unleash that, there is that kind of incredible, the power of initiation. You don't have to have a vision. I don't know how the story ends. I never have. And I wouldn't have imagined myself going to Italy, and I wouldn't have imagined the highs or the lows. And so I think to me, it's just this sense of giving yourself the freedom to let go of, other dreams that people have given to you, or expectations that, you've internalized, or just stories that you tell yourself. I mean, a lot of times when I'm working with clients, the number one thing is that I think actually every single client I've ever talked to in my entire life, which is thousands of people at this point, they all have exactly what they need to be successful. I've never talked to a person where I thought the tools for success are outside of themselves. It's just that we often have the parts in the wrong order. Or more importantly, we're telling ourselves a story about why we can't have the thing that we want more than anything. So I often tell people, like, start by telling yourself a new story, because why can't you have that thing that you want more than anything? So, when I was leaving Italy, I was a bit sad because I'd wanted to stay there, and I thought I could only be happy there. But the change happened inside of me. So I feel like, I'd like to go back. Why can't I have that? Why can't I have a life here and a life there?
I love it. And I don't know if you know this, Lauren, but The Artist's Way is like my number one recommended book.
It works.
Yeah, it does work. I read it 1999, right? So 21 years ago. And yeah, I mean, I credit it to the start of the studio, and actually realizing like, I don't have to have a life where I go and I sit at a desk every day and I wait for retirement. And that was pretty profound, and it completely changed the trajectory of my life.
No, it really, I mean, it's something about cultivating a different set of habits that I think are the keys that the author gives you. It's the sense that you're going to go do different things. You're going to look at different things. You're going to write about things. Like, yes, you're going to kind of interrogate the expectations and attitudes that you have around your goals. And that is valuable work. But just writing in a journal, like, you do start to see the patterns. Like, that is the gift that you get, where, I would write about something 5 days in a row, and I would be like, I'm so tired of complaining about this thing. Maybe I should stop taking my phone to the gym. It's just sort of really clear to me after I have a kind of circular return to something that, some action is required there on my part. So that's what I really liked about it. And I definitely, none of it was linear for me. Going to Italian, I love the way that Italian sounds. Like, it is the language of my heart, and it connects me to a generation of my family I don't have a direct connection to. And, going to Italy was completely amazing and accidental in a way. And starting jewelry was just something I did because I wanted something more active than looking at a painting. And then all of those things kind of collided, and I feel just incredibly grateful every time I think about it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, Lauren, I'm curious because, the name of the podcast, right? Tranquility du Jour. And so how are you finding tranquility in your day right now?
Well, from working with the very hot metal, I do not do two things at once ever. Like, I just focus completely on finishing a task. And that's really, really different. I used to always look at my phone while I was talking to someone on the phone. Now I don't. So that, I think, is 80% of having a peaceful life. And I think a lot about lunch. And I also go for a really long walk. When I lived in Italy, like, the light is different. And that's what has sort of attracted painters. And there were entire years that I lived in New York in neighborhoods where you couldn't see the sky. That was a very common motif in my life. But in Italy, I could. I mean, I lived, in an old neighborhood where the buildings are only 2 or 3 stories tall, and the light is really beautiful. And it was something that I was constantly conscious of because, when it starts to become sunset, you start to think about going out for a drink and who you're going to meet and where you're going to go and dinner and things like that. And so I go for walks a lot now, and I get up before the sun rises, which I never did before. I used to sleep until noon. Just because I really like the light. So I think finding the things that speak to your heart, even if you don't quite know what they're going to say or what you're going to say, is a big part of it. I use my Instagram account as a pleasure diary. Like, I just post things that give me pleasure. And like, For everything else, I can talk to a friend. And yeah, I think really for me, it's become this situation where, Montaigne wrote in his essays, lend yourself to others and give yourself to yourself. And I think that I've learned how to do that, or at least try.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Lauren.
Thank you. Exactly as I said before we chatted, like, it's such a gift to have this conversation because it allowed me to think through these things and I got a lot out of it. So I really appreciate it, and I appreciate you.
Thank you. So over in the show notes, you will find a link to find Lauren online, her website, laurencerand.com, her Instagram /Lauren Cerand, her Twitter @LuxLotus, and Facebook @LuxLotus. And a reminder, if you haven't yet, to join the Tranquility du Jour Insiders Facebook group, where we share resources, gain inspiration, make connections, and you can be part of the online book club, where we soon will be announcing November's book club pick. I hope you've enjoyed Notorious RBG, because I sure have. What an amazing woman. Those of you new to Tranquility du Jour, there's a link in the show notes to find out more and sign up for weekly inbox love. Also link to my books and planner, ways to find me online, my clothing line, which is locally sewn and eco-friendly, and if you have a moment, a request to share a review of this podcast over on iTunes or any of my books on Amazon or Goodreads. My hope is that it helps other people find more tranquility in their everyday. I hope you enjoyed the information in this episode. And thanks for inviting me and my guest into your day. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Have a great week. Namaste. Mm-hmm.